Welcome everyone to the final conversation in our Emerging Practice Lecture Series. The Emerging Practice Lecture Series was a collaboration between Island City Lab and the Caribbean Architecture Students Association that highlights recent Caribbean architectural practices with distinct methodologies. These practices produce accomplished bodies of work rooted in the praxis of designing in the Caribbean context. Beyond the body of work, the series looks at the experience of spatial practice in the Caribbean and all that means culturally, materially, economically, and politically. It looks at the role of the architect in the production of space in the Caribbean and how we can start to reimagine that. I am Jordan Channel. I'm the program director at Island City Lab. We're a think tank that aims to democratize the processes that initiate, build, inform, and maintain towns and cities across the Caribbean. I'd like to hand it over to Terry and Llewellyn from the Caribbean Architecture Students Association.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and esteemed guests. My name is Terry Llewellyn, and I am a member of the Caribbean Architecture Students Association. It is with great pleasure that I stand before you today, to introduce our distinguished guest speaker. Robert Thompson, a Jamaican-born architect, has cultivated a career deeply rooted in the principles of responsible building practices with a special focus on hillside living. After earning his first degree in architecture from the Caribbean School of Architecture in Jamaica, Robert's journey took him to Trinidad and Tobago, where he contributed to the local architectural landscape from 2005 to 2007. Seeking further expertise and international exposure, he then moved to Germany in 2007 to pursue a Master's of Architecture, completing the program in 2009. Robert's professional trajectory reflects a commitment to environmentally conscious practices as seen in his work between Germany and Switzerland from 2009 to 2010. Returning to Trinidad in 2010, he established Ackee Workshop in 2015 with a specific focus on responsible hillside living. The mission of Ackee Workshop aligns with Robert's dedication to creating authentic, transformative surroundings while aiming to increase the accessibility of thoughtful architecture across socio-economic boundaries. Without further ado, please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mr. Robert Thompson. Handing over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Terry-Ann. Thank you, Jordan, for having me. So today I want to talk about finding your why. Now, I think it's an important tool to have an articulated vision that will propel you to whatever you define as success, right? Next. Now, I want to kind of start to draw a line, kind of give you my origin and influences, to kind of highlight some of the kind of unconscious influences that I've had in my life or my architectural development. Next. So I grew up between a little village called Cooperspin, Trelawney, on the north coast. My father was a fisherman and my mother was a crafts lady. She makes craft and sells. And this little village was 5 miles outside of Falmouth, one of the most architecturally relevant towns in Jamaica. Next. And my other home was in Stettin, Trelawney, which is a village on the edges of the Cockpit country, predominantly farming and extremely steep terrain. So you could almost say that, you know, my attraction to hillside is in my DNA because I've grown up in that environment. Next. Another thing that was very important to me, or something that stood out in my mind growing up, was the landscape in the countryside. There was always lots and lots of yam hills. I don't know if any of you have seen that before, but it just looks like corn rows on the mountain. And that always gave me as a child a feeling of delight because my grandfather was a farmer, I would always be involved in, working on the farm, digging these yamils, and that always gave me great delight. Next. Now, this is the image of Falmouth Water Square. And Falmouth have a huge collection of intact Georgian buildings. Well, I hope they still do. Last time I was there, it was all intact. And I think I'm gonna kind of use this image as a backdrop to kind of compress 25 years of development, which I think this town was a subconscious influence of. So in 99, I went to Mobile Comsi through, a friend saying, let's go do architecture at Mobile Comsi. And we're like, yeah, whatever, sure. And between 99 and 2001, I developed an interest for architecture and got kind of better at it. And then in 2001, I applied to I applied to CSA, which at the time for us was this kind of impossible goal because it was incredibly difficult to get into back then. I don't know if it still is. And let's see, 5 of us went up to the interview, and 3 of us, including me, got into the second year. We skipped first year. And so from 2001 to 2004, I was at CSA. And one of the biggest, well, the first challenge slash kind of, I would say I'd call him inspiration was Mr. Michael Lord. He was an incredible tutor that just pushed you like he's a football manager. He just like pushed you really, really hard. And I mean, everybody was in my year remembers him as a force. So I left CSA in 2004, worked for a bit in Jamaica. Then a Trini friend of mine gave me a call one day and said, would you like to come and work in Trinidad? And I was like, I'm not so sure. Then he's like, yeah, man, just come. And I went down there and started working with Jennifer Smith Architects. We got the opportunity to work on a lot of exceptional projects. And I did that for 2 years, all the while kind of deferring my master's because I had already applied and got into the Dessau Institute of Architecture like a year before. So finally I decided, okay, I'm going to Germany because I saved up enough money, of course. So 2007, I left Trinidad, went to Germany. It was a completely new experience for a country boy from Falmouth. Seeing Berlin for the first time was like a shell shock kind of vibes. And the work was also different because the school at the time was kind of making a transition to the digital. Like we're doing, we're kind of like steeped in the digital paradigms of, lots and lots of scripting and algorithmic design. So, it was, most of my tutors were, people that worked at Zaha Hadid, Lamont Foster, and so on. And, I really got into it all the while thinking, how can I apply this if and when I go back to the Caribbean? And then in my second semester, I got a scholarship to go to the sister school in Switzerland, Switzerland, which is in the Alps. And that was also kind of like another shift because Switzerland could be seen as kind of the Japan of Europe. So they're very precise in their building techniques and they're very rational in building. And now I've, fallen in love with this idea of programming and scripting. Then I had to move to Switzerland where they're not into any of that. And I managed to weave the two together as much as I could. Had a successful semester in Switzerland, then went back and finished in Germany in 2009, then one of my tutors hired me to work in Switzerland with him. So I moved back to Switzerland. So it was kind of like a pinball kind of vibes. After that ended, I decided, you know what, can't find any work in Germany. This is 2008, 2009. That's like height of the credit crunch. 2010, my visa's running out. So I'm like, all right, forget this. I'm going back to the Caribbean. So I came back to Trinidad and I was working with Jennifer Smith Architects. And I did that for another 3 years. And then I left and worked for a engineering firm. That ended, and I decided, okay, it's time for me to do Ackee Workshop full time. Right. So that's kind of like the condensed version of getting from school to establishing a practice. Next. Now, something that when I started wasn't at the forefront of my mind was why I was doing this. And eventually establish a why for improving the accessibility of thoughtful design across socio-economic boundaries, because, and kind of like what Island City is about, democratizing design was one of our thoughts, because architects and architects kind of serve the elites, and people in a certain bracket don't get to talk to us as much unless we reach out to them, right? And that's what I try to do, because I couldn't depend on most people, most kind of regular people would encounter architecture on a kind of civic scale. But in the Caribbean, civic architecture is not what it used. It's not the same as Europe, right? It's not. There's nothing. There's nothing inspirational about it, really. Once in a while, you might get something, but not at all. But where I saw change could happen, or where I saw influence could happen, is in being accessible and getting people to understand what we do and how it all works, and things like understanding delight within design was an important thing for me. And this is what kind of formed the practice after the fact, in a sense, right? Next. So I want to look at 4 projects that kind of outline that subconscious journey towards a narrowed focus. Started in 2015, next, with Hill House. And this was like my first solo residential project for a family of 3 in the west of Port of Spain, within on the hillside of a valley. And next, the site was super steep. We, when the client took me there, we had to use a rope to be able to get down onto the site and kind of do my site visit. It was very scary. Your first project is this huge challenge, but I've never had a problem understanding that as an architect, you need a good team. And I managed to establish a good team for this project that I still work with to this day, because we have a way of working together that's, very important in, bringing these things to life. Next. So with this design, we looked at kind of something that we noticed in the context looking at the site was people tend to want to build flat houses on a hillside, but I don't think that's the right approach, because then you end up just decimating the hill. So what we looked at was trying to keep the floor plate as narrow as possible, and then creating these multi-level planes that distributed the program. Next. So we ended up with this really long, thin building. So around 20 feet across, but really long. And all the program is just distributed inside of that. Next. So the middle image, the center image, you kind of enter, that's the main floor plan. This is the public space. And you enter that space, that's for, you know, living, kitchen, dining, so on. Then plan to the left, that's a sub-level where you have a self-sustained guest space and the client's kind of lounge. And then on the top floor, you have all the private living spaces, all of them being linked with a bridge. Next. Now, this is some aerial images of the completed project. It was completed in 2017. And another important lesson here was, you know, everything you design is an assumption. And once you get to the site, once you break ground, you know, you pray that, okay, your assumptions are right, but when they're not, you need to be able to shift. You need to be able to be swift in kind of shifting, but still maintaining the integrity of what you originally decided to do. And you can't be precious about your design during construction, because construction is also another design phase. And what determines how much you could design in construction phase is your client's budget. So if it's a tight budget, you definitely have to be tighter with your design. But I mean, you want to be tighter with your design anyhow, right? But I think that lesson of understanding that flexibility during design was a key takeaway from this project. And in the aerial images, you could see the difference between this house and the context where, you know, the other houses are, you know, a bit more robust, a bit more, you know, flat. Next. Now, this project was going, well, we got commissioned to do this project for a Trinidadian painter. It was supposed to be his residence and his studio for himself and his two kids. And this wasn't built, but the lesson in this was a lesson in how to handle disappointment. So it's a wooded site with a large, sorry. So it's a wooded site with a large sandbox tree, some power line running through it. And the site is flat, and then it gradually rises at the back. So we still had an hillside element to consider where water and so on was concerned. Next. Now, this client had another house on the north of Trinidad in San Souci, and he wanted us to, we stayed there, my wife and I, and he wanted us to kind of like, you know, understand this house, to kind of take the qualities, the handmade feel of it, and bring it into this one. Next. So this is the ground floor plan we came up with. We, you know, it's a very, he got rid of the studio and he wanted to be able to paint and live in the same space, because he doesn't separate his painting and his life. So it's very rugged, a lot of inside-outside space with lots of external covered square footage. That's the ground floor. Next. The upper floor was all bedrooms with a room at the back specifically for a piece of artwork that he's been doing for the last 20 years. But this piece of work was just incredible, the layers that he has on it, and it speaks to, you know, how he is as an artist. Next. So we had this rendered because we needed to see what it would be like. We needed to see what our vision would be, because he didn't end up building it. He built something else instead and said he would build this elsewhere, but still kind of, I'm still gutted. But, you know, we imagine this kind of really honest, really simple construction with simple materials. Next. Internal view with steel frame floors with timber floorboards and a robust kind of finish that you could just you can just imagine it being full with paint and still having its same kind of character. You know, it's not a space you be too precious and you just kind of like mess it up and it still has its, you know, character. Next. Now, this is Shoulder House. This project is, I think, our most, well, one of the most ambitious projects. This is when we kind of realized, wait a second, hillside is becoming a thing. This is a 3-bedroom vacation house on the North Coast. And it's built in it's going to be built in virgin forest. This should be starting next year. Next. So this is the site. It's cut off from the road by a ravine. And during the rainy season, there's, you know, it's basically a river. And we had to bridge that to get to the site. And the site is basically 1-in-1. It's a 45-degree angle, extremely steep. When we walked the site the first time, your legs were like shaking. We wondered, what are we doing? You know, like I took a tree specialist there because we are cataloging all the trees because we plan to keep whatever is kind of hardwoods. And, you know, the client wanted the most private lot. And the most private lot had specific conditions. So then we had to decide, okay, you know, is the privacy worth the trouble to do this? And it was. So we decided, okay, we're buying this lot. And, you know, we're looking at methods of kind of not stripping the land too much of its nutrients, but trying to keep it and trying to work construction in with the what's there. So for instance, if we grade it, we're going to keep all the topsoil so that we could create berms and create banks and put them back in, because it's going to eventually become a food forest. And that's another thing that we try to implement with our projects, to make sure that there's an element of food security that could be achieved on a hillside with our clients. Next. These are some diagrams looking at the development. So you can see where the ravine splits the site. Then you can see that is a bit small, but you can see where we kind of created a massing on contour, and then we're bridging over the ravine. Next. This is a site plan looking at the different masses. It's broken up into 3 on the top level. And, you know, 1 is the garage. Next. So you'll see better here in the plan. You have the garage, then you go down some stairs, you cross a bridge, then you enter the main house. And it's all kind of radial, following the contours. And then, you know, 2 volumes kind of relate to the ravine, and 1 volume relates to Shoulder, which is an island that's off the coast. And also, you know, the client's really big on sunset, so we had to also angle it so that we could get the best kind of view of the sunset. Next. So this is on the left side, it's a rendering of the bridge link. The materials we're looking at is a lot of timber, and we're thinking to do a kind of pigmented plaster to finish it so that it's dark, so it almost becomes invisible within the environment. And hopefully we'll get to achieve it. But as I said in the previous, I said at the start, we can't be too precious. When this starts, there's going to be a lot of things to respond to on site that will see this project morph. And the importance of being involved in it is making sure that that morph thing improves or stays true to the ultimate vision. Next. This is a image looking at an internal view. We try to kind of really stay honest with our materials. You know, we don't like to cover things up. We want it to be able to age and still be, we want to be able to go there in 100 years, well, but anybody who experiences in 100 years, even if it's abandoned, it would still have a quality of space that could touch, you know, the person who's visiting it. You know, it could be full of bats and snakes or whatever, but it would still have that kind of, that, you know, that ruin feel. And yeah, that's something I always try to achieve in my work. Think of 100 years down the line, what would be inhabiting this space if it's still around. Next. All right, so this project is one of 7. The last project was 2 of 7. And we are aiming to do 7 kind of, well, I call it our magnificent 7s. We want to do 7 houses on hillsides that kind of exemplify our thought process for the typology. And this is the first one that we've managed to build. So this project was a rare opportunity. It's a residence for a family of 4. And it's also in the Dega Martin Valley on the west side. And next. This is the site. It's very steep. Where the greenery is to the left of the image, that was a massive gully that we had to respond to. Next. This was an early design meeting with the client. And from this point on, the project became a very intense collaborative effort between myself and the client. And that's where we managed to carve out a very strong why for this project that took us all the way through to the end and helped us to achieve, you know, what we set out to do on the day we started these sketches. It changed a lot in the 4 years that we were doing it, but because of this back and forth and this understanding of the higher vision, we managed to achieve it. Next. This is a site plan looking at the building, and it's, you know, multiple volumes falling down the hill. Next. So this is the entry-level floor plan on the bottom right. You park on the top and you walk down to enter the building. Next. Top left is the main living spaces. The top of that image, the public areas cascade towards the view. And then to the bottom of that same plan, so all the bedrooms kind of, you know, zoned together. And then the bottom right is the guest and gym areas, along with a sunken area for the pool. Next. These are some elevation drawings, just looking at how the building as a massing responded to the oblique cut of the land. That's an important factor when you're looking at hillside buildings, is you don't want to create a building that's too high, but sometimes you really can't help it, because if you do that, then you create a massive issue with a massive wall towards the back. So we had the client was the engineer as well, so we managed to play with both. And the reason it's called sunken house is that we wanted it to be very kind of private at the entrance. So when you come up, you just see a horizontal line and a timber gate. And you kind of, it's 2 different stories, because when you approach it, you see it from the street, but then it disappears. And then you come back up and you're not really sure what you're looking at. when you get to the entrance. So next. So the top left speaks to what I was saying earlier. You have that horizontal band. And then this is inside the parking area. And the image on the right side is what you'd see coming up the hill. And one of the concepts for how the materiality of the building worked was geode crystals, where you'd have the smooth external or one material on the outside, but then when you break it in half, there's the crystals on the inside. So that's what we tried to kind of emulate with the timber and the concrete being a subtraction. And bottom left, you'll see the kind of close-up of what we did with the timber. And next. And this is an image of a recent image of the building. It's complete now. They're moving in and it's performing. There's certain things that are still being commissioned, but it was a rare opportunity. Not many houses like this get to be, you don't find clients like this very often, who's willing to trust in the vision all the way through, even when things were getting hard, because things inevitably do get hard. And I always tell clients that we're not here, architects aren't necessarily here we won't eradicate problems, but we're here to help solve problems when they inevitably arise. And this one definitely had a lot of problems that needed solving. And it was a massive dance with the hill, with the workmen, with clients, with me. But the biggest lesson with this project was getting buy-in from the people who were building it. So we tried to have meetings with the team of builders, even the bricklayer, whoever, because they needed to understand that they're not just here to lay bricks or do a ceiling or to do some electrical work. You're here to build a house. You're working towards this vision and you're accountable for your part of it. And you need to treat it that way. And I think establishing that kind of mindset with the workers was the reason why we were able to kind of have a complete building that stayed true to its conceiving vision, let's say by about 75–80%, which is a pass for me, right? Next. So I want to finish up with just talking about what's your why, because finding and articulating a purpose and using that purpose as a guiding light to help you choose what to do, choose who to work for, and just use it to define your own metrics of success, and using it to better yourself and better your practice is very important. It's a very important thing to consider from now while you're in school. Just to have an articulated why will help you leaps and bounds moving forward. Right? Next. Thanks. Was I too fast?
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much for that, Robert. Really impressive body of work, and it's such an interesting sort of condition that you've sort of taken, right? I think hillsides are really interested in the Caribbean. So most of our cities are coastal. So on one edge you have the sea, and then the city sort of expands until it meets another edge at the hillside. I think you're one of the only practices in the Caribbean I've seen to really specialize. And you're not really specializing on like a building type like hospitals or I'd say, you know, residential buildings specifically, but you're really specializing in the site condition of the hillside. So I guess the question I have is, what gap did you see that like brought you to like the specialization on hillside living?
I mean, it wasn't necessarily a gap. It was really how, you know, I sat and considered, how do I differentiate myself? Because, you know, if we're all doing the same thing, it's difficult. You know, you come to a client asks you, so why shouldn't I go with the architect? What's the difference? And, you know, we would probably spit some stuff about, you know, I could do this, I could do that. But really, I wanted to have a mechanism in place that basically roots out that question. Because you have a project on a hillside, you are coming to me if you want that project. That's so you know why you come to me already. And I mean, just looking at the trajectory, it's really in my DNA, this hillside. I grew up in the cockpit country. So all my projects, a lot of my projects were on hillside. So I was like, it was only kind of, wait a second. How can I learn more about this site condition to kind of help to alleviate the stresses that it causes when it's not done properly? You know, how can I develop a body of work that tests ideas in water management, in site management, in construction sequencing, in, you know, it's really expensive as well to build on a hillside. So how do I, you know, start to work with that? How do I encourage people to build smaller on a hillside, or maybe not build at all on a hillside, right? Because sometimes, you know, the solution is not to do anything. So it just gives me, I think the specialty gave me the, it gave me the opportunity to be the one person and get out of the noise of kind of like being generalist to everything else.
I mean, hillside building is extremely complicated, and you touched on that, right? There's a whole logistic aspect of it that I find extremely like complicated and confusing. So, I mean, I'll tell you, projects have touched on it, but what specific ways are you solving, I'd say, the challenges of hillside building?
Well, the first thing is we have to really study the site and look at what you can and cannot do. That don't, like, people tend to want what they want, but on a hillside you can't. That's the first hurdle. You have to adjust your needs to what can be done, right? And there's a limit to what can be done if you're going to be working in harmony with the site. And we aim to work in harmony with the site. So, you know, what we do, we try to, you know, create a vision that will help people to create a vision that takes you further than your kind of simple, oh yeah, I want a bedroom, I want this, and I want that. It takes you further than how you want to live and how can you live on a hillside that doesn't have as much impact downhill as it would. And, you know, through that, the way we build, you know, the contractors we use, you know, we have to be really sensitive to that. Let's say when you can only build in the dry season on a hillside because you need a lot of protection if you're going to do it in the rainy season. It's just not advised. So little, you know, things like that. We just, you know, make sure that we dot all the kind of things like excavation, how your equipment enters a site. It's really difficult with a hillside. Depending on if the hillside accesses from the bottom, from the top, or on contour, it's a lot of different responses you could do. And it's just to understand that you just don't come with a bulldozer and just go, the site informs the first move.
Definitely, but I think if we zoom out to the side to sort of a broader, I guess, macroeconomic context, right? Our economies are very dependent on sort of importation of materials, right? Which can be extremely unsustainable in that economically, right? Because not just for the development of the project, but there is a constant need to import for maintenance as well. So if you put a steel panel, you're going to have to keep importing steel panels over the lifetime of the building to sort of maintain the project, right? So I guess my question is how are you thinking about broadly reducing importation in how you design and the design phase? But also I'm curious a lot about local material production in Trinidad, like what materials are available to you locally. And how do you think about materials? You spoke a lot about it in your projects. I'm curious, are you thinking macro on that question?
So this is something that I think about all the time. My wife and I always discuss it, and she wants me to kind of shift my practice towards, a more re-indigenizing architecture, right? Where we would go back to wattle and daub and rammed earth and mud houses. But the issue is there's a social stigma that we have to get over. So people want what their neighbor has. If we decide we're gonna build a mud house for you, they're gonna be like, "What? You think I worked that hard to come live in a mud house?" Now they're majority, like almost all right. So cement is produced here, blocks, steel not so much, timber's imported. So it's not a lot that you could work with. And the things that you could work with is not socially easily grasped, if you know what I mean. So we're currently starting another initiative called DIRT, which is an acronym doing impossible relevant things. And we're looking at, investigating rammed earth in a kind of rainy climate to see how it works. So we are thinking about how to move away from that. But then after we've dealt with that, then I have to think about how does that translate to a hillside. So there's a constant conversation, but right now it's difficult to just say, yeah, I don't do XYZ, because it's the mentality.
Yeah. Also, DIRT is a really cool acronym. I'm really excited about what kind of dirt you getting up to, you know what I mean? I think also, just to close out the sort of panel discussion section of this, I'm really interested in the other part of your practice, which is these webinars that you put on. So a lot of it seems to be about knowledge building. So on one hand, you're making a case for your competency as a sort of hillside connoisseur, in other words, right? But it's also working to sort of expand the imaginations about what's possible and different ways of living, how to occupy a hillside sustainably in different ways. And so I'm curious about how this folds broadly into your practice. So, Ackee Workshop, DIRT, and then these webinars, how do they work sort of as an ecosystem for your practice?
Well, So going back to our purpose, to improve the accessibility of thoughtful design. That's not necessarily doing buildings, it's about information, it's about reaching people and being accessible. And so that was the root of the webinars, because I was like, okay, well, how do I get to speak to people? Just do a webinar, set up some topics. People are all like, it's a very common thing to say, oh, we don't know what architects do. We don't know what architects do. Okay, well, let's answer that question. And that's what that's where the webinar started from, as well as getting to speak to more people, getting to hear what people have to say, bringing people on to talk about stuff. Like I had one of our mentors on, Richard Picard. We had a great chat together, and it's just important to have these conversations like this, for others to see, because we architects and architects are very insular, and it's so our social landscape has changed, so we also have to change with that. That answer your question?
No, definitely. I think we think the same way on that. Access to information is such a hard thing, and like sort of expanding that is important. I think we're also trying to rethink how architects engage with what, quote unquote clients, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not prescriptive, maybe it is just presenting sort of information and facts, as you're saying.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, if you think about it, how do you know that what you know is right if you don't have discussions and defend it and kind of explain it to people? You need that, So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and so it's what we were talking about earlier before the call. Like a part of the emerging practice lecture series is to really, do that sort of access for architecture, Caribbean architects, right? Caribbean architects a lot don't think of or don't like talk about their work a lot, right? And you're even mentioning that this idea of like documenting, archiving, and that process is not usually part of your workflow, and you're starting to integrate it, right? And so, yeah, I think this idea of access, like I appear into your studio. I see you on social media all the time. I attend some of your webinars, but like peering into your practice, that access is like crucial. And like I'm learning new things about what you do, and especially that last project, this idea of like keeping nutrients on the land because it's supposed to be a food forest. These are ideas that I think it's important to spread. So with that said, I want to go into the sort of audience Q&A section. A couple of people have asked a few questions, so I'm just going to shoot them to you, and hopefully you can answer what they're asking.
Right.
So Anthony Bridgewater, he asks, client desires notwithstanding, are there common considerations for hillside projects that you try to convey to your clients? Also, are there specific hillside building policies in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, I mean, the EMA has, the Environmental Management Agency has, different rules that so they have what they call the activity schedule, something like that, where you have to basically get what you call a certificate of environmental clearance if your building is if your site is above a certain grade. And that's important to kind of, keep your water levels that's running off at the minimum. Apart from that, there isn't any, major like stipulation from like planning. Just needs to make sure that you're within what their zoning criteria are. But with regards to what I advise my clients, I always say, just let's build the smallest building that we can. Because hillside is not a big house thing. I mean, sunken house is kind of like a different idea because that was kind of built into the hill. But I would always encourage clients to, the smaller the footprint, the better you come out on a hill, basically. Because then you're not getting equipment all over it. You're not doing too much site work. You're just kind of doing it in a single zone. So yeah, I would say, try to build small. Hope that answers.
Andrea Duncan asks, how do you translate this hillside building expertise to contractors, builders, and tradespeople?
With a lot of models, a lot of conversations, and a lot of talk. So, what tends to happen is that contractors don't look at what you give them, and they assume, it's like what they already know. And you have to make sure you have that conversation. The onus is on you to make sure that they buy into what you're trying to do, right? It's not just give them some drawings and, oh, you didn't build my thing. They have no relationship to it, right? Until when a contractor has buy-in, you'll get what you want, right? He'll talk about your design. They will, really defend it. But you need to, like, what we're trying to do now is choose a contractor earlier so that they're part of the design process, so that they have skin in the game. They're part of the design, and that kind of stretches that collaborative feel that we strive for. And yeah, I think getting them involved early so that they're just not getting upset at plans at the end, like build this. They were involved. Yeah.
That's really interesting, this sort of marriage of design and construction as part of a process. Yeah. Donnell Wedderburn asks, how does Robert collaborate with landscape architects, landscapers, farmers, arborists, people who work with the land? Are those professions less separated in Jamaica? I think he's asking. And a comment is, this practice sounds multidisciplinary. She would like to hear more about the hillside home that's also a food forest. What does food production look like? So to summarize, I think she's asking, how do you work with people who work the land, like landscape architects and farmers, and in a multidisciplinary environment, and more about that project of food production.
Right. So, as I said, I like for that project on the North Coast, we'll bring in, tree specialists to kind of label the trees. We brought in a permaculture expert to look at how we could start the zone. So I try to involve everybody as much as it can, as much as the budget can as well. And, even if the budget can't stretch, we try to have conversations to try and implement it ourselves. But doing, having a food element to our design, really, we just consider where zones could be for growth. And then we kind of, design within that. So it's not just the project is not just build a house, it's build an ecosystem. Hope that kind of answers what that's
good. Yeah, absolutely. Really vibing with the permaculture. I think that's something I'm recently exploring with our own practice. This sort of whole systems thinking about land and inhabitation as well. Doris asks, hillside construction tends to need a lot of structural retaining walls. What type of materials do you prefer, if any? Concrete, cut stone, gabions?
I mean, Depends on what the design asks for. I mean, gabions are really nice, if done properly. Concrete, anything that gives you longevity. Because I always say there's a level of sustainability in how long something lasts. You know, I mean, yes, to produce concrete is has a heavy footprint, but if it lasts 100 years, you know. So yeah, I think any one of those things you mentioned, depending on what it how it works with your design.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think of the architects I've spoken to, I think you have the most sort of site specific practice in that the site is really determining how you think and
Yeah,
about the design. And there's not like ideas of slope, ideas of soil condition, ideas about like trees, the things that you're responding to is very like rooted in the site.
yeah.
So last two questions. Doreen asks, how do you balance conservation and protection with clients' desire to live in remote and underdeveloped areas?
That's a great
And
question.
is there an obligation to build more consciously in these ecologically sensitive areas?
I think more often than not, the people who want to build in those ecologically sensitive areas are not opposed to living with the, what exists there. So what I'm saying is that when we build something, we build it in a way so that the forest could take it back. Right? So for instance, on the North Coast, we worked on a project up there, and right now it's just being taken back by the forest. There's snakes, there's everything. But you have to be that kind of person who's gonna live with that. Because no matter what, you can't respond to something if you're not willing to live with what's there. You know what I mean? So yeah, it depends on, yeah. If a client wants to live out in the bush, then they have a certain kind of thinking about their environment, because you can't escape what's there. It's always gonna come back. It's kind of like a river. No matter what you try to do, it's gonna take back its own form. And
Yeah, that's interesting. Go ahead.
I always think about with a building, when I design it, like what would it look like when it's a ruin? That 100-year view, like how beautiful would this be when it's like just bush sticking in through the windows? And it's it's the end of our buildings, really.
Yeah, I like this 100-year perspective because I think people think that building is sort of like the development of the building is a sort of end product. And the idea of maintenance is it's especially in like sort of resource scarce high importation areas, the idea of maintenance is very low. So this idea that architecture is a process, it's always being moving closer and closer to being a ruin is an interesting perspective. And how do you design for that decay over time? Is a cool perspective.
Yeah, it informs the materials you use. You know?
And last question, Kimberly Burrows asks, in the all-inclusive process you described, what are some ways you do or could integrate the voices or skills of communities that you are working?
Right. So this kind of speaks to the dirt initiative. So what that aims to do is to re-indigenize rural communities, because people in the rural areas, you build a board house, you buy some blocks, you start building up your blocks around that, and eventually you have a house, right? If we re-indigenize it where people are looking to build with resources you could find in the bush, you cut your sticks, you make a rockland dog, but design it beautifully, if we put those skills back in the community, then we don't start to design with those skills, then people from the rural communities start to come to the city to kind of build things like this because the skills there, then, you know, that cycle starts. So that's kind of like where we're at with dirt. We just need to, you know, start to design the prototypes and build them, which is to, you know, it takes a lot. It's a lot to do. You just have to do it, you know, slowly.
That's interesting. So dirt is this sort of self-initiated process, like in collaboration with these communities.
So we're working with a friend of ours who they have another initiative called ARC, which is Alliance for Rural Communities, where they do it's really sustainable farming. And they, you know, you could go online and order food from them and they'll bring you kind of like, you know, organically grown stuff from a place called Brassaseco, which is like the northern jungles. But yeah, so we designed the Rammed Earth project for her a few years ago. And then we decided, you know, maybe we should try to put this knowledge back into the communities and look at other things that's being lost, other building techniques that are being lost, and try to reinvigorate it and bring it back. So that's where it started. But we're trying to find funding one and time too.
That's cool. I mean, there's a similar initiative in Jamaica. I don't know if you're aware of Ware Collective. Watland Dab and Red Earth Collective. Yeah. Like sort of this like archival understanding of indigenous building techniques and bringing that's really cool. That's a cool connection across Caribbean islands
exactly.
that maybe you know you want to reach out and see what collaboration.
I've also there's another group in Australia as well that's also doing it that we've been talking with. Yeah, no, it's good to again talking. You have to talk to people. So yeah.
Absolutely. So Robert, that was the last question. I want to thank you for helping us to close out the Emerging Practice Lecture Series. As I mentioned, this is a collaboration with the Caribbean Architecture Students Association, and they've been fantastic. The graphics that you've seen have come out of that group. Tajor, very talented designer at Caribbean School of Architecture. I think this is a really important project that sort of bridges gaps between academia, what students and lecturers are doing, and practice, how it is actually being initiated on the ground, how these ideas from academia filter into practice and how architects actually work. Thank you so much for sharing your work. Thanks for everyone who attended the series, and thanks to the other presenters for also sharing their work. Island City Lab is really dedicated to sort of understanding and exposing ideas about the built environment. And coming in the summer, we're looking at housing and sort of affordability, looking at housing as a legacy in the Caribbean, and also looking at the current sort of real estate system of housing that we found ourselves in. Architecture plays a big role in that, and I think filtering from emerging practice into that series, I think will be a productive exercise. Thank you guys so much for attending. Thank you again, Robert, for showing us the important work that you're doing, and I'm looking forward to Dirt to see what
we might invite you down to come and do some work.
Yeah, definitely. I'll make some, you know, I'll make some rammed earth. No problem. All right. All right, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining. Take care.